Red Bull?
It's yerba mate.
Oh, is it like tea?
I love these. Yeah, it's really good.
I've never had yerba mate, but I've seen the name before.
I like the enlightenment.
Is it like a kombucha, like a acquired taste kind of thing?
No, actually, it tastes kind of like an Arizona tea, but it's like really like energizing.
I'll have to try it. Hi, everybody. Welcome to a special summer break edition of the podcast. I'm Zach. I'm very glad you're here. Yeah, school's out.
For summer.
Sure. Who are you? I introduced myself.
I'm Steven.
Hi there. If you found us
I'm
on
Summer
the
Steve.
Good Place feed, we're off this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks with the next episode of The Good Place. And if you're here on the You Can't Disappoint a podcast feed, it's good to see you again. It's been a second. I hope you're doing all right. How's the kids? I don't know.
Still hate me. I don't.
Today we're talking about something exciting we're doing on the Patreon right now. And before we get started, we've got to shout out the people on our Patreon, our $10 and up patrons at patreon.com/can'tdisappointpodcast. Those people are Mary Baker Budisa, Danny M. Lugo, Justin Fortier, and Autumn Marsh. I have a lot of fun saying that, and he hasn't said anything yet, so I'm going to keep going with it. Today we're going to talk to you about what, Steven?
Today we're going to talk to you about the basement.
Don't say anything about Steven's speech impediment. He's really insecure about it. Yeah, we're talking about the basement. It's the weekly, when we're able to get it out. Come on, give us a break. It's the weekly That 70s Show Rewatch podcast that we've started on our Patreon, as voted for by our patrons. It's been a lot of fun. We're still in the first quarter of like it's a
wow,
business.
Zach, the sports guy.
We're honestly past the first quarter. We're getting into Q2 of the first season of That 70s Show on the basement over on Patreon.
Now
and
he's
today,
F1 qualifying. Look at Zach.
We're going to play for you the first 2 full episodes of The Basement. That's a little intro episode we did just talking about That 70s Show and why we like it and why we chose it. And a second episode, which is the recap of the first episode of the show, the pilot. You're about to hear
Zach, for
both
some
of those.
reason, those are a little hazy to me. I don't remember everything so well. How
they're about
you?
to find out why. I don't remember a goddamn second of it. But apparently we were there. That's all on the Patreon. You should check it out. Patreon.com/can'tdisappointpodcast. We're going to get that going. So stick around because we're going to play the first 2 full episodes. And come on, the Patreon starts at $5 a month. It supports this show. It helps us get new gear and to take it further and to be able to do more with the show. So come on, throw us a couple bucks if you like what you hear today.
Throw us those bones.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to get into this. Swift and easy. A little tip of the cap to our community pop-up, because this will go on the community feed. I hope you're doing well. I wish you'd return my calls. I miss your smell, your touch. You know, the usual. And we're going to get into the basement, Steven. Why don't we take a few steps downstairs and talk about the basement? Okay, here we go. Hello, Wisconsin, and welcome to a new Rewatch podcast from podcasting best buddies, Zach and Steven, coming at you.
We're here. We've gone through the time machine. Mm-hmm. We're sitting in what year does the show start? 1976. Yeah.
Season 1 of 8 of That 70s Show. 1976. Yes, we're here. We're podcasters. We've done a lot of TV shows. What we are not are people who were alive in the 1970s or the 80s or even the part of the 90s that 90s show has taken place so far. But what we are habitual marijuana smokers.
Did you just admit I'm calling the police right now?
And I think this show is going to be the perfect show to dive in from a very The Circle perspective, right?
Yeah, I think that we kind of have more of a ping pong situation set up than a real circle together, but we'll make it work. I can take up at least 2 chairs.
Hanging out down the street, the same old thing we did last week. Not a thing to do.
So thank you for joining us, everyone. If you haven't met us before, we're Zach and Steven. You're going to get to know us way more than you ever would have wanted to. And this is going to be a very fun, a very loose, a very stoned revisit of one of our favorite shows from the time we were kids to currently, that 70s show. A show, it's the first time we're talking about a laugh track sitcom, which will be interesting because, I don't know, I feel like somehow that 70s show is exactly every annoying laugh track sitcom format, but because of when it's set and because it's about like some hooligan younger kids that get into trouble and have sex and smoke pot, it always felt like a little grimier than the other laugh track sitcoms. It always felt a little dirtier, especially when I was a kid.
Sure, when I was because like, you know, I had Friends, and I had Seinfeld as a young kid that were playing in my house that were examples. And this one seemed so much edgier because it was cool young kids doing stuff they weren't supposed to do. Yeah.
Well, let's start there because this was a show that was a very big part of my childhood, actually. Mm-hmm. I feel like, do you remember when you were a kid where you would have been watching it, like what was airing, the reruns of that 70s show? Steven and I are children of the very late 90s. We were both born in 1997. Mm-hmm. So the show had already been on for a few years when we were born. I think the show started in 96.
Yeah.
I'm going to look that up. 98. So we were alive. Never mind. Botched the whole podcast so far.
Burn it to the ground.
About a year old when the show started. So watching it as it aired wasn't really a part of our experience, but catching reruns of it was.
To start, I watched, you know, the last part of the show as it aired. I remember watching.
Really?
Yeah. My mom loved the show, so it was a common watch in my household.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, which is funny because my mom, you know, she was born early 70s, and so she liked a lot of the references, and some of the characters were a little nerdy and dumb, and so I don't know why, but that was a show that I watched with my mom all the time as a kid, and I didn't know what most of the stuff meant at first, but I remember as I got older, these, you know, references from the show being thrown around the house all the time, and things like that. It was a part of our household, which was kind of cool.
But then to circle back to my question, do you remember when you watched it then as a rerun, what you were watching it on? I remember it being on Teen Nick for a while. I remember it being on Nick at Night for a while. But I feel like there was somewhere else I was watching it.
It was on like one of the
Was it on ABC Family?
They showed it on ABC Family, but they also showed it on like WB or something. One of those like...
Sure, like
single
a
digit channel shows, like
sure.
where they just showed reruns of whatever the CBS or whatever network sitcoms that they had, Fox, and they would show them on there, you know, after the Judge shows.
I watched a lot of it that way. You're right, because I can even see this is one of those shows that I can like picture it in like grainy television.
Yeah, like I feel like this was on like Channel 5 or something, like something that I didn't watch other than when this popped up on the TV guide.
I feel like there are a lot of reasons why we shouldn't have super loved this show or felt attached to it, because there are a ton of references we don't get. It's set in a time that we can't relate to. Mm-hmm. When we started watching it, it was about kids that were older enough than us that we couldn't quite relate to them either. Or the parents, how the parents acted. We couldn't really... I can relate to how the parents act a little bit, but we didn't have the same like stern parents of the 70s. Mm-mm. But for whatever reason... I was obsessed with this show. I really liked the characters to the point where I was trying to catch the reruns in as close to chronological order as I could.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to see what happened. I wanted to follow Eric and Donna's relationship. As the characters in later seasons started to leave, I like wanted to follow that thread too.
Mm-hmm. I think that for me, it was the most like risque sexual thing I could see and not have to close my eyes.
And it's about kids.
It's about kids.
Because, like I said, they're older than we could relate to, but they're young enough that we could, like...
see ourselves there in the future.
Yes. Mm-hmm. When you watched the show as a youngin', was there a member of the core group of characters that was your self-insert? Was it the easy one, which is Eric, or was it more complicated?
Yeah, I think being a nerdy kid who wanted to be more than that, I think that Eric was the easy one for me because I didn't feel like I was dumb enough to be Kelso. I wasn't a stoner, so I wasn't Hyde.
Didn't have that chip on your shoulder.
Yeah, so I feel like for me, I liked Star Wars a lot from a young age, and so Eric liking Star Wars, I was like, nerdy kid can get the pretty redheaded girl.
Unfortunately, I always saw myself as Eric, but I feel like maybe I was closer to Fez than I'd ever like to admit. Because he's very theatrical, he's very center of attention, and he's always doing stuff that gets him attention, but might just come off very off-putting when...
Well, Fez was my favorite character when I was younger. When I was early watching the show, Fez was my favorite because I thought he was so funny.
That's so interesting because, and we'll get into how we feel as we're about to rewatch all the episodes. This is just, for those out there who are wondering, this is just a little intro to episode. Next week we'll start with the first episode of the show, and then we'll go through all 200 and something of them. So we'll be in our 70s when we get to the end of the 70s here. So next week we'll start the rewatch. I feel like watching it this time, Fez is going to be pretty much instantly unlikable, and that's not really going to change. So he was your favorite character growing up.
He was. I thought it was very funny.
I think going into it this time, we're going to find the adult characters way funnier than we did as kids.
Absolutely. I think last time I watched this show, Kitty was my favorite.
She's so funny. And Red is really funny, too.
Yeah, Red's really funny as well.
And maybe we'll touch on the 90s show at the end, but that's a big reason why that works is because those characters are in the forefront of it, and it's great to see them again. They haven't lost a beat.
Yeah, they look great. They're still just as funny, if not funnier now, because they have more freedom to be, and it's a different perspective. And I'm excited to take a look back at how funny they always were, but I didn't get it because I was a kid, and adults, couldn't be funny if they were being stern.
Well, it'll be fun to watch it this time because while we're still just as clueless for the most part about the 70s, what we know about the 70s is what pop culture, mostly this show, amongst other things, that have taught us what happened in the 70s and what was cool and not cool in the 70s, what music was good, what movies were good. It's just what I've consumed pop culture-wise has taught me about that time period. So even though we're just as clueless there, I think it's going to be fun to revisit this show about a group of high schoolers, even though by the end of the show, they look like they're all 30.
They're 40, yeah.
It's a show about high schoolers, and I think it'll be fun to revisit that as like a 26, 27-year-old.
Yeah.
Trying to see how much we can take ourselves back to those high school loves and the high school wins and fails that felt way bigger than anything could ever feel at that time.
Absolutely.
Because I think at its best, this show, which was kind of grimy and dirty and sexy, captures some of that stuff in like a Boy Meets World kind of way.
Yeah, totally. It's just a little less clean cut than Boy Meets World.
So you really liked the show as a kid. I really liked the show as a kid, really followed it. I think it was the first adult show that I really was invested in, live action adult show as a kid, because I think the characters were young enough that I felt related to them, and it was edgy, and it was teaching me things that I didn't know and nobody else was teaching me about them. I certainly did not know what weed really was.
No,
and
I didn't realize they were smoking weed until I was much older. I thought they were just sitting in a circle.
We should address that because I had the same exact experience. I didn't know that the circle always meant that they were smoking weed until after I had been smoking weed constantly for years, actually.
I didn't realize they were smoking weed
not that long ago.
There was like a specific episode where they like get caught by the pastor, and I was like, oh, that's what's going on. I think that's the same one where like Eric's like high and like talking to his parents, but I had no idea, and I was watching this show for years before I made that realization.
Because we were really young when we started watching it. That's my experience too, because of course I kind of came to learn as a kid the bags, like the episode where Hyde gets caught with the bag, or the talk of brownies. I think I kind of figured that out, but I was too naive to perceive that this was like their daily routine type thing. I think I just thought it happened in some special episodes.
But not the other ones. And then I was like, oh shit, all of them?
So since you've been that age, have you stuck with this show? Have you picked it up and watched it that often? How do you feel about it when you haven't watched it critically as an adult?
I haven't gone through and watched it in about maybe 4 years it's been or so. I did go through and watch a lot of it up until some of the later seasons that aren't as good. But at least the first few seasons I definitely have rewatched semi-recently, not recent enough to remember all the details, but it's a very nostalgic show for me that brings a lot of like little laughs and remembering watching it as a young age. This, for me, I feel like was one of the things that shaped my redhead thing that I had as
Totally.
a kid growing up.
That's
As well
why
as I'm
we're
I'm
so
a big Green Bay
close.
Packers fan, and when I realized that I liked the Green Bay Packers was also when I was like a young kid watching this show, and so that was a cool connection for me.
That is
so
cool.
I think that there's a lot of really cool moments in the show that I kind of will remember being a kid and watching and how I perceived it, and then seeing it now as an adult who's a very different adult than I was as a kid. It's really cool and fun to see it from a different perspective, pay attention to the jokes a little bit more, get way more of the jokes than I got as a kid.
And touching on what you were saying about Green Bay and Wisconsin, like, it's so the Midwest.
Yeah.
And we didn't grow up in Wisconsin, but we grew up in Indiana. So I think there are going to be a lot of reflecting on growing up in a kind of small, kind of
Well, and I think our hometown
dilapidated
is probably
town in the
about the
Midwest.
size of Point Place, especially when we were younger growing up there. It seemed really similar in size and nature, and the problems that were happening are
Sure. It's-
seem
people
big
are
because you're in a small place.
losing factory jobs. I feel like
Yeah.
Red loses a factory job in the show, and Steven and I come from a town where there were a bunch of factories. Everybody had a factory job. You could work there for forever. You could make a shit ton of money. And then the factories all closed in an economic crash, and a bunch of people lost their job. And now we've got like empty holes in the city where factories once were. And there's just not the lifeblood that having a workforce like that brought to a community.
Totally.
And Point Place is kind of like that because this is a different sort of depression area, their financial struggles are a part of it. I think it's going to be fun to visit that stuff as a survivor of the Midwest as a child. I revisited the show a couple years ago, and I think I got a ways into season 4, maybe. And I didn't really stop watching it because I wanted to. I just started watching other stuff.
Yeah.
And I do feel all that nostalgia. I think it's a great show. I'm excited to dive back into it. And I'm doing it with an open heart and even with kind of, we'll get into a little bit later, the baggage that comes with like the cast of the show.
Yeah.
I still feel like I can embrace talking about it every week with an open heart and with a fun spirit because this show meant a lot to me. But when I revisit it, it makes me cringe a lot more than it did, obviously, when I was a kid. And I think a lot of that comes from like when it was on the air in the late 90s, early 2000s, and the types of jokes that flew, not to mention the writers being able to say, well, people were so much more
loose with what they would say in the 70s. They use the excuse of not having to be sensitive.
Yeah, people were way less sensitive about certain things in the 70s, so we can say whatever we want. And I think sometimes to the show's detriment, they really talk down on the female characters in the show. I think actually all of the female characters of the main core, they'd never really serviced them in the story the way that they do the other guy characters. They kind of just flip on a dime and get a new hobby just because it's time for them to figure out something to do in the show. So I'm going to be interested to watch it from a slightly critical lens and see how much I can try to turn that off and just have some fun.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it.
What I'm excited is one of the main conceits about the show is that we're in the basement. It's going to be a very circle-friendly podcast, so I want this to be very stream of consciousness, slightly stoned thoughts that hopefully can help us forget some of that stuff that makes us cringe a little bit. And we wanted to, I think, do some like strain highlights type things.
Yeah, we'll talk about what we're enjoying.
Talk about what wine they're drinking at book club. We're going to tell you guys what weed we're smoking to talk about that 70s show on a podcast, because we're inviting you into the circle with us. So everyone, raise your way of ingesting and join us on this journey. What have you got in your system today, in your neural pathways?
So I've got a mix of two yummy flavors today. I've got some Tokyo Sunset, which is a cross of Gorilla's Breath and Sunset Sherbet, and I've got some Super Glue. So two Gorilla Glue lineage strains, which is my favorite strain. So a wonderful way to take in today. Feeling good, feeling happy, feeling creative.
That's nice. I like that. I've got some Crazy Glue.
Oh, it's a
strain
glue party.
I just got. It's that's true. I haven't looked at the dynamics of the strain. I don't know if it could very, very well be Gorilla Glue, because not only is it a great strain, it's also a very present strain. It's pretty easy to get some Gorilla Glue, which is very nice.
Yeah.
I think it's a sativa dominant hybrid.
Nice.
And it was outdoor grown. And because of the great state of Michigan, it was a $50 ounce.
Craziness. I live in Chicago, by the way, so my means of appraisal and acquirement vary in cost, but the dispensaries are very expensive in Chicago.
Back into that 70s show, outside of what character did you see yourself in? Which characters did you like the most as a kid, and which characters do you like the most now? Who do you think was the funniest? Whose storylines were you the most interested in?
When I was a kid, I'll go through 3 stages of my life with this. So when I was a kid, I really liked Fez because he was funny, and Wilder Valderrama also hosted Yamama on MTV.
Oh my God, he sure did, didn't he?
Which I was a big fan of.
Which, of course, we'll be covering heavily on this program.
Exactly.
We'll be going through Yo Mama.
And I really liked Kelso because I thought that the burn thing was hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
Then when I was a teenager, I was much more into Hyde because I thought he was super cool and edgy. And that's when I started to really be crushing on Donna hardcore.
Oh, sure.
And now as an adult, I really think that Kitty and Kelso again are my 2 favorite characters.
Yeah, as a kid, I think I liked Eric a lot,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think that's going to be I think I'll like him, but I think he's going to annoy me a lot more than most of the characters. I thought Kelso was really funny. I definitely thought Hyde was really cool.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that bag of worms in a second because I don't know. We'll get there in a second.
Yeah.
But I thought Hyde was a really cool character, and I liked he is trying. They gave him some interesting stories of personal development for the type of sitcom that the show became. And even as a kid, I think I was really interested in is he going to meet his dad? Is he going to get over this stuff? Is he going to go to jail like in certain episodes?
Yeah.
And now I feel the same way. I'm like, is Hyde going to go to jail?
Is Hyde going to go to jail?
Yeah, and as an adult, Kitty and Red definitely. Although Red kind of reminds me of my dad in a bad way. Of course, it's different because my Red talks to his son.
Yeah,
but
well, not because he wants to.
He kind of looks like my dad, and he's really stern. And I don't know. I can definitely relate to Eric just being intimidated and feeling like you have to walk around the house a certain way. You have to say things a certain way just to appease your volcano of a parent.
Yeah.
But there was no understanding of love underneath it like there is with Red and Eric. But I think it'll be fun to dive into the parental dynamics of the show.
Absolutely.
For sure. Especially, I think we're going to reflect a ton on how we were kids that were getting one over on our parents a lot. Most days there was a ruse to be had. Do you agree?
Absolutely.
And I think that's kind of the vibe of the show. They're always trying to sneak the keg downstairs so the parents don't see it. They're trying to smoke weed every time they hang out in the basement without getting caught.
And it harkens. I'm sure we'll get into some stories of us, Zach, but I definitely remember times where we were coming up with excuses onto why there was a certain smell and thinking we played it cool and played it off, and absolutely never did.
Yeah. We didn't learn any lessons from this show because we made the same mistake.
No, we were like, it worked for them.
Oh, that's so funny. That's so funny, and it's true. Now that we've had a good laugh, let's get into the weeds. Let's talk about why this show is hard to talk about a little bit and why we're going to not reflect too much on it, although we're about to discuss about it. Obviously, Danny Masterson is the biggest one, the elephant in the room. I don't know where the trial is exactly now. I think it keeps getting pushed back because of all sorts of things. So who knows what's going to happen to it. But it seems pretty clear
bad,
that he did a lot of horrendous stuff to a lot of people. And he's one of the main characters of this show, and we're going to be watching it and talking about it.
And
I really
don't think it would
Hyde.
be fair to the show
Agree.
for us to keep too much of that in mind thinking about the character at the time, even if he was doing those terrible things during this time period. I think that I want to give the show a fair shake.
Yeah.
And know that as a person, he's bad, and if he does anything in the future, I will not be watching it. But because of us going through this show, I think that we're going to keep, obviously if there's anything to talk about, we'll talk about it, but it's not going to be brought up every episode.
For the most part, we're going to talk about Hyde. We're not going to talk about Danny Masterson.
Exactly.
However, two things. One, this is a sitcom. There's so many executives, writers, directors, producers, cast members that make this thing the thing that it is. And it is none of their fault that one of their actors turned out to be a bad guy. You can't predict something like that. Everyone has the potential. Not everyone has the potential to become a rapist, but everyone has the potential to do something that people are like, we wish we hadn't picked that person for a thing in the past. We all have the potential to be terrible, and it's not our previous employer's fault that they didn't see it, right? However, it's also going to be really hard to watch Hyde and watch flirty Hyde, watch sketchy Hyde, and not cringe.
Think about how gross he is
when he's being like, or even in scenes when he's like wooing women successfully. Even that, it's gonna feel weird. So I don't know. I just thought we should get it out there. That obviously, I believe the victims in that scenario. I think that dude should go to jail. Unfortunately, I don't think he will because of another thing, the Church of Scientology, which I'm not educated enough to go too into it, but there are a couple cast members of this show, some that are still on that 90s show that are members of the Church of Scientology. And I think that they are doing a lot to help Danny Masterson along his trial path. And I think that's all bad. But I still am going to watch that 70s show and enjoy it. And Hyde, it'll be interesting to see if it's even possible for him to be one of those characters that I really like in light of everything. I don't really have anything else of merit to say about it. It's just kind of the elephant in the room that you have to mention. And I wanted to mention
it. Get it out of the way now. And
next week we can talk about the show.
Exactly.
As we're getting close to wrapping this up, any last thoughts you have? Are you excited? Are you hesitant? Where are you landing on the meter?
You know, I'm excited to look at it and enjoy the show again. I am anticipating a fair amount of cringe, which I think will be fun to talk about. I think the last Patreon show that we talked about on here had a fair amount of that, and it became really fun to look at the good and bad that is there, because there's enjoyment to be had all the way around. And I'm excited to see in hindsight how much heart is in this show, because I do think there's a lot of moments that are really sweet and tender.
And how many of them play. Because after a while they're like, oh, they hugged again. But then like everyone remembers the moment from the first episode where Eric and Donna are on the car and they kiss.
Absolutely. We all wanted to be Eric on the hood of the Vista Cruiser kissing our cute tall neighbor girl.
Yeah, and now I kind of get to, from hundreds of miles away, kiss my tall neighbor podcaster.
Aw.
I guess.
But you're my redheaded neighbor pod.
I've been hearing a lot about this car that runs on water. The other thing is, obviously, there are a ton of episodes of That 70s Show, and we're going to be rewatching all of them. And in each episode, we'll do some trivia questions. We'll have some circle-esque conversations based around the topics of the episode. We're going to award like a MVP, who gets the first hit in the circle, our MVP for the episode. We'll be talking about our favorite funny moments and our favorite like cringy moments in each episode, along with just diving back into that vibe of being a fan of this show, being a kid watching this show, and celebrating it. We're going to start that off next week. And after we do all of the episodes of That 70s Show, and some bonus episodes, I'm sure, the plan is to continue with this universe through the decades, to dive into the 80s, dive into the 90s, starting with the 80s show. Do you know much about it? Have you ever watched
I've never seen an episode of that 80s show. I only know that it has Glenn Howerton.
It does have Glenn Howerton. It was on air at the same time as That 70s Show. It aired in 2002. So like season 4 or 5 of That 70s Show. I've seen just little clips of it. I'd never really watched it, but it's assumed that the main character of the show, which is Glenn Howerton, is Eric's like cousin or something in the 80s, but it's never mentioned. There's no real connection to the show other than it's set in the 80s and it's kind of like a spiritual sequel. I don't know anything about it. It only lasted 13 episodes, and I'm just as excited to dive into stuff like that and see what they were doing.
Absolutely. Glenn
Howerton makes it really exciting to watch. We're big Sonny fans, big Glenn Howerton fans, really. So it'll be fun to see how much of his rage comes through in his like everyman sitcom character in That 80s Show.
Yeah.
What about now we're living in a world where that 70s show has just recently come back into the world. A big reason why we chose it as this Patreon podcast is that 90s show is out. It's a literal spin-off of that 70s show with returning characters set 20 or whatever years after the original show that revolves around Eric and Donna's daughter moving to Point Place for the summer to spend with her grandparents, Red and Kitty, who return in a big way, and other characters make cameos. And it's very much a continuation. It's got the same cringy sitcom jokes, but it's got the same warm sitcom fuzzies.
Yeah.
How much of it did you watch? What did you think of it?
Just the first episode. I liked it quite a bit. I thought it was cute. Or maybe I saw the first 2.
I think I watched the first 2 or 3. And the first episode with all the little cameos was great. It was really
it was
cute.
super cute.
You know, honestly, I think we're kind of in a place where I'm yearning to go back to the laugh track sitcom days a little bit. And it's been a long time since there's been a laugh track sitcom show with a cast or characters or stories really worth telling and obsessing over. So seeing a show like this and seeing the super young actors in a show like that is like a breath of fresh air. It is,
because we don't get a lot of that right now that are like, everything's always either super high produced, you know, multi-camera comedy shows, or it's like a intense serious drama. We don't have a lot of kind of nonchalant laugh tracks shows that make it and that are worth watching. And I think that 90s show seemed really cute. The first couple episodes I saw, I definitely would watch more.
Well, that's our intro episode for The Basement. We're going to come back next week and talk about the first episode of the show, do our segments, talk about the characters, talk about the laughs and the cringes. And I know for a fact the first episode is one that I've seen a lot of times and I'm really nostalgic for. And I think that's going to be a really fun time to revisit.
Yeah,
so I'm looking forward to that next week. And we're often going to end this show with a segment that we're going to call That 70s Playlist, where kind of is our little radio DJs. Unfortunately, That 70s Show nowadays on streaming, it doesn't include most of the famous 70s songs that were included in the original run because they don't have the rights to that music for long-term streaming situations. So at the end of the episodes, we're going to talk about what songs were originally in the episode and maybe give our favorite of those and maybe in the episode playing it. So I think today we don't obviously have a song from any episode to highlight, but why don't we as a nation listen to the That 70s Show theme song together? What do you think?
Heck yeah, let's do it.
Everyone, Wisconsin and beyond, we'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in. This has been The Basement.
Hanging out, down the street. The same old thing we did last week. Not a thing to do but talk to you. Not a thing to do out in the street. Oh yeah.
Do I get the car? Bitchin'!
Eric. Not in front of your mother.
Thank you, Pop. Sir.
Yeah, well. Clean the attic.
Hello, Wisconsin, and welcome to The Basement.
What were you going with there?
I was going for like
Todd Rundgren?
Yeah, because I don't actually know any of his music.
Oh, he's got some good songs. We're definitely going to end the program with the Todd Rundgren song.
Nice.
He's good. I like Todd Rundgren.
I'm not familiar with Todd Rundgren. What did
Clearly.
Jackie call him? Renegade?
A couple things. Ted something one of the times. Hi, everybody. Welcome to The Basement. That 70s, 80s, and 90s rewatch. Today, we're really kicking it off with the first episode of That 70s Show. Our great experiment begins today, truly, as we talk about that 70s pilot. Hi, everybody. I'm Zach.
I'm Steven. Welcome to The Basement. How you doing, Zach?
I'm doing great. Steven and I have just stepped out of the circle and over to the couch of the basement to record the podcast for you all. So what's your poison this week, Steven? What are you nipping the nip of?
This week I've still got my sweet combo of Tokyo Sunset and Super Glue, but I've also got a little bit of Blue Dream in pin form that I'm rocking with just to even it all out. Like a Neapolitan ice cream of high.
Cool.
What about you, Zachary?
I enjoyed a rolled paper cigarette with some crazy glue flour and some
Nice.
strawberry banana live sugar.
Ooh.
Yes,
that sounds
feeling-
exciting. Sounds yummy.
Very sludgy, feeling very grimy, feeling very much like the basement in which this podcast takes place.
Hanging out down the street, the same old thing we did last week. Not a thing to do but talk to you. Oh, yeah. Hello, Wisconsin!
I'm excited to be here. I don't know why. Maybe you listeners got it off of the first episode. And can we just like clear the air? Is there a little bit of trepidation with starting That 70s Show Rewatch podcast? A little bit?
I think so. I
Yeah.
think there's a little bit of like, okay, here we go. It's like if, you've been swimming in a regular pool your whole life, 3, 4, 5 feet.
I already don't get it.
And then you go to an Olympic pool that's got like a 20-foot deep thing and you just jump right
And That
in.
70s Show is the Olympic pool.
Yes.
Compared to the small potatoes we're used to talking about.
Compared to the blow-up Barney, the inflatable, 6-inch deep pool that's in my grandma's backyard.
The reason you're saying this is because the show has just over 200 episodes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that your main source of trepidation?
That's the main source of trepidation.
Well, I understand that. And the TLDR of this tirade I'm about to go on is watching the first episode was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And took away a lot of that trepidation.
Absolutely.
But there's a lot of episodes. We know that it gets less good at a point and is kind of cringy in moments throughout. But I'd like you to understand that this show was voted for us to do.
Yeah.
I'm very happy it was. It was one of the options that I came up with, so I'm glad it was chosen. Nobody's holding a gun to our heads and saying recap all 201 episodes.
Maybe
of that
not
70s
you,
show.
Zach, but
I don't like to quit things. We'll, of course, at least do like the first 2 seasons, and if everybody hates it or wants to do something else, I think we're gonna have fun. Is the
I think so,
TLDR
too.
because I just really, really enjoyed watching the first episode. It brought back a lot of nostalgia, and even though I have seen the episode within the last couple of years, I'm thinking about it from this perspective of I can watch it remembering what it was like to be 12 years old, haven't had my first real kiss watching this. I can watch this and feel
Yeah.
nostalgic to how it felt to watch these teen romance stories when you're a budding teen that wants to be romantic, you know? I can see it
versus
from that
like
perspective.
an adult that is in a relationship. It's very different.
And now I can also see it from the perspective of now I've grown up and done those things. So how much of this rings true and how much of it rings corny? I think for this episode, the majority of it, all the way around, even as a kid of the 2000s mainly, that it rings pretty true.
Absolutely. I think it holds up incredibly well in a lot of ways.
Okay, so today we're talking about the pilot of That 70s Show, episode 1 of 202, I think. That 70s pilot. This episode is the only... Okay, this episode of the show was directed by a guy named Terry Hughes. And it's really interesting because this is the only episode he ever directed of the show, because every other episode of this show was directed by one person.
Really?
All 201 episodes, David Traynor. He is actually
Oh my God.
Super prestigious television director. We'll talk more about him next week. But this episode was the only episode of the entire series, all 8 seasons, not directed by David Traynor. It's directed by Terry Hughes, who he directed 108 episodes of The Golden Girls, which has come
Hell
up in our
yeah.
conversations a few times today. Also directed 100 episodes of Third Rock from the Sun, which was
Nice.
created
Joseph
by a
Gordon-Levitt.
couple of the creators of that 70s show. Terry Hughes, who directed this episode, also directed all 12 episodes of that 80s show
Nice.
and 5 episodes of Friends. So
Aw.
Terry Hughes, quite a career. This episode was written by the 3 creators of that 70s show, which is the writing team of Bonnie Turner and Terry Turner and Mark Brazil. So those 3 people are the creators of that 70s show. And this was kind of a different era of television where the creators would build the show, they'd write the pilot, maybe they'd kind of oversee the first season or half of the first season, and then they hand it over to the writer's room where like a showrunner would be appointed like of the writer's room. We talk about showrunners a lot nowadays in the world of like your Dan Harmons and like the guys who did Game of Thrones and like what they do to their show. But the showrunner has never exactly been like a salaried, like paid thing. It's more like within the writer's room, you're the guy who runs the room. It's just like they're usually just a writer, but they're like, so that's what would have been going on here. So Bonnie Turner and Terry Turner, whenever they wrote for the show, they wrote together, and they wrote 2 other early episodes of the show, Eric's Birthday, which might be the second one, and That Disco episode, where they're
Love
only
the
other
disco episode.
contributions to that 70s show. But the Turners, outside of this, they wrote on 129 episodes of Saturday Night Live.
Nice.
They wrote both of the Wayne's World movies.
Okay.
They wrote the 1990s parody, The Brady Bunch movie, which was pretty
Nice.
funny. They wrote Tommy Boy, and
Hell
the
yeah.
2 of them are the creators of Third Rock from the Sun.
That's awesome. Tommy Boy's a great movie.
It's really funny. It's probably worth a revisit. I haven't picked it up in a while.
Tommy Boy's one of my favorites. Fat guy in a little coat.
Meanwhile, the 3rd creator, Mark Brazil, he stuck around a little bit longer on that 70s show. In the first season, he writes Eric's Burger Job and First Date. And then he wrote a couple episodes in season 2, Red's Last Day and Hunting. Outside of that 70s show, he wrote on 10 episodes of In Living Color,
Hell yeah.
5 episodes of Third Rock from the Sun, and more recently, a lot of children's television, including 15 episodes of the 2 Lab Rats shows.
Oh, I saw some of the first Lab
Sure.
Rats show.
That's Mark
I'm
Brazil.
familiar.
And that was fun for me because I didn't really know much about the creative force of that 70s show. So to learn that it kind of was, and you can tell watching the show, I think it's such a good study of how to write a sitcom pilot.
Yeah.
Of the things that happen, the characters that are introduced. It's almost like mathematical how the jokes and the relationships work. And it works. It doesn't
sets
feel
the scene and the
mathematical.
tone really, really well.
So you can tell it's these people that know how to come together, come up with a show, build it, and then give it off to talented writers. One of them, I don't know when he started writing, but Will Forte was a writer for that 70s show for a
that's
few years.
awesome.
Yeah. So there's that. Now it's your turn to introduce a segment that I'm kind of nervous about.
All right, everybody at home, in the air, on the ground, under the sea, in the sky, on the moon.
wow.
It's time for one of my favorite segments on the show. We're gonna go into the basement breakdown. I'm Spud Speedster here, and I'm gonna...
Spud
And I'm-
Speedster?
I'm-
My lord. In my own Zoom call, Spud Speedster?
That's right, don't adjust your television sets or your Zoom settings. I am me, Spud Speedster, here to talk...
I'm so on board, Mr. Speedster. Don't trip up on my behalf, Mr. Speedster.
We're gonna ask our special guest today, Zach. Zach, is that right? Zach?
That's correct. You
Where you
got it
from,
right
Zach?
all of those times. Good old Indiana.
Indiana.
I was
Nice.
gonna
Thank
say
my
Indianapolis
sister
because I'm not
lost a
from
lot of money
Indianapolis, but I feel like if I was on a game show, they would say that I'm from Indianapolis because people know what that is.
Absolutely. I'm
Sorry,
certain.
Spud.
Well, that's a lovely city. Haven't been there myself. Not since I got kicked out. Heyo. This is the part of the show where Zach is going to break down for the basement what happened in this week's episode. How you feeling about that, Zach?
Fine. I'm feeling healthy about it.
Healthy. Okay, well,
Healthy.
speaking of health, we've got a special twist
Hell yeah.
to this recap show. Zach, are you ready to hear what it is?
Health. Yes, Spud.
So,
butted on
normally
me.
on our program, you have 20 seconds to spill the beans about what we've got going on. But this week, you have a special opportunity to gain 5 more seconds. Zach, 5 seconds can do a lot in that time, can't you? I bet you can, sport. Well, here's how you earn those 5 seconds. Myself, Spud Speedster, am going to take a mighty rip from something over on my end in the booth here. And if I cough before the 20 seconds are up, then you gain 5 more seconds.
You know, Mr. Speedy, I don't really feel that that's much of an advantage to me at all because I'm going to be stressing about that the whole time. And I feel like there's no chance that Mr. Speedster, championed Ripper, that you're not going to be able to last the full 20.
Well, Zach, you see, you can take those suggestions and put them right here in the suggestion box.
Yeah, you don't care.
It's a trash can.
It's just that
It's garbage.
Mr. Spud Speedster has a well-documented drug problem that he just this segment's in his contract.
Well, after my second wife stabbed me in the chest, one of my lungs collapsed, Zach, so I actually am at a bit of a disadvantage here.
Okay.
All right, audience. Do you think Zach can do
5
it?
seconds? Do I win something if what happens after?
You get to play again next week
I don't get anything.
against the Johnson
I'm just stuck
family.
in this purgatory. There's a family next time. I'm just
You
stuck
gotta
in this
beat them.
purgatory. Okay.
They're playing for their kid with fibromyalgia.
Yeah, I'll kill him. I'll beat the shit out of him. I'd like to bet $25, Mr. Speedster, please.
All right, why don't you go ahead and set that
Oh
there
my
on the
God.
table?
Let me ground myself. I have
right.
to put my money. I thought we
Just
were
put
like,
it right here in Spud's hand. Come on, give it to Speedster.
Spud, I didn't know that. I didn't know that I had to have cash on me for the game show. I thought that was like part of it.
Well, we'll see how it all fares out for Zach.
Can I
after
write
this
you a
short
check?
commercial break.
Is a check okay?
Banks and the Speedster don't exactly get along. Well, all right, here we go. We've got 20
God.
seconds on the
Okay.
clock. We might add 5 to it.
Jesus
Zach, are you
Christ.
ready?
No, my brain is not on that 70
I'm going to
show
count
right
down
now.
3, 2, 1, go. I'm going to start your timer.
But that
I'm
wasn't
gonna
it.
Start my riff.
That wasn't it, though.
And then you're going to have 20
man.
seconds. How
Okay.
are you ready?
Can I take a sip?
You can
Spud?
take a sip.
Do I win like a car if I do good?
We'll see about that.
Okay.
Alrighty. In 3, 2, 1, go!
It's May 1976, and Eric and his friends are hooligans that hang out in their parents' basement and steal beer. Eric gets handed the family car, but there's a stipulation. He can't go out of town. But they have tickets to a concert, so he breaks the rule and takes them to the concert, where the car breaks down for the battery, but they can't call the parents. They make a deal with the shady guy who works at a car shop to give up some tickets so they can get their car
That's
fixed.
time! Ooh.
Mr. Speedy, I didn't get anything of... I would have liked to mention Eric and Donna. I would have liked to mention Kelso and Jackie. But I don't think I did badly at all.
You know, Zach, I really didn't establish a points or scoring
For the
system
jury.
here.
Yeah, it's okay.
I
You're kind
also
of making this up as you go,
was not
Spud. I
paying
got that
attention
vibe.
for most of what you were saying because
that
I
true,
was focusing. So I think that you're going to
Spud's
get
on
a
another
solid,
planet.
you know,
Spud's on in another world right now.
Spud's off
Spud.
the wagon.
That's how the advantage works in my favor.
Yeah.
Is that Spud doesn't remember what we're doing after.
You know,
20
Zach,
seconds.
we have a special point system here where you're going to score between 1 through 5 American flags.
Okay, cool.
Because this is the 1970s.
Are you gonna
and
remember
we
this
love
next
the
time?
flag. Zach, I'm going to give you a solid 3.5 American flags. That's a total of 175 stars. And
You'll get there.
let's see, so that's 39, and then and 45 stripes. That means you get to play again next week, Zach. Are you excited?
Hell yes. Fuck yes.
I probably
Spud.
will be fired at the end of today's taping, so there will be a new host, but I'm Spud
that's
Speedster
really
signing
too
out
bad, Spud. I
from
think
the
you did great.
basement breakdown.
Okay, well that's that segment. Let's do some trivia questions about this episode of That 70s Show, Steven. I've got 4 questions for you, so I'll kick it off. What date does the first episode take place on?
Oh, April 16th, 1976.
I said the month in my recap. It is May 17th, 1976.
I got the year.
Yeah, you sure did.
I got to really get out of the spud.
Season 1 of 8.
Yeah, does not mathematically
something.
work out. Did they not think it was going to last that long? Why didn't they start in like 71?
Well, I think the argument is that the 70s weren't really the 70s until the late 70s.
Well, they're different 70s because you still had the disco 70s at the beginning.
That's true. I
Yeah,
mean,
this
I'm
is the
with
rock
you,
and roll
but I think
70s.
they just wanted it to be like the height of 70s culture.
Sure.
And maybe they didn't. I don't know. Of course you want your
Interesting.
sitcom to last 8 seasons.
Yeah. What time does the first episode start, Zach?
8:30?
Oh, you're really close. 8:47
That was just a guess.
p.m.
Okay. All right.
Uh-huh.
You know, this is really whiplashy. I don't really know. Am I talking to Steven now?
I don't know either, Zach. I kind of
Okay.
lost myself in that one.
What food does Kitty say is so versatile?
Oh, Vienna sausages.
Good job.
A favorite of mine on long road trips as a child. How much did the dealership offer Red for the Vista Cruiser?
That's one of my questions. You took it away.
Snatched it.
$400. $400.
Wow. Good
So
job.
I'll give you my last one. What time does Donna say that Canada closes?
9:30.
There you go.
And my last one to you is how often should you yield, Zach?
Always yield. You always yield.
Absolutely.
Well, let's get into some things about the episode, and specifically what I'd like to talk about are, I don't know, the tons of things that I relate to in this episode.
Yeah.
One of which, maybe most of which, being getting high downstairs with your friends, which I thought in this episode, watching it as an adult, they make it loud and clear what's going on.
It's very obvious.
It's very
how the
obvious.
hell did we not know as kids what was going on?
Because we were children. We didn't know anything that was going on.
Yeah.
We were like, 9/11, no big deal. I'm 8.
It's like, damn, tough.
I'm 4 years old. I'm just trying to play Q*bert outside.
Nice.
Yeah, I relate a lot to the wall moving while your parents are saying something very directly to you. And I think that the show handled it really well. It sounds like it came from experience. What did you think about it?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. That scene was so relatable to me. The like, you know, you just had a really fun time and all of a sudden your environment violently changes.
Yeah.
And you're like, I was not prepared for this. I'm just like holding on for dear life,
It
trying
was
to
like
not make
me
it
when
seem
Spud
like I'm high.
Speedster came into the room.
Yeah. I thought that was so relatable. I felt
Yeah.
like the speech about like a car is a privilege. This is this. If this happens, it's gone. And like really just putting fear into you before you drive somewhere alone for the first time versus like support and
Well, very
real.
relatable for me was when I got my car, my stipulation given was you can't drive on the interstate.
Mhm.
Because my mom is like terrified of the interstate for some reason.
Once you hit 65 miles an hour, Zach, that's when the devil
Yeah.
comes out.
I just black out, and that's not good for anyone. But of course, within weeks or days of having
Sure.
my license, I was on the interstate because everything cool is on the interstate.
Yeah,
right?
that's where you
There's
gotta go to
nothing
get
do
anywhere.
here. I can drive. I'm going to get as far away from these people as I possibly can.
Yeah.
So that was really relatable to me, not just from Eric's end of course, doing that to go to this cool concert, but also Red knowing before he said it that that was just going to fuel him pushing
Yeah.
the boundary of where he can take the car.
Which is great. Great parent episode too, because
Mm-hmm.
they know what the fuck's going on. Like they're not stupid. They know that Eric's gonna do that. They know that he's taking the beers downstairs. Like, and they play ignorant, but
Yeah.
you know, they're more so than I realized as a kid. Red and Kitty are letting Eric experience things to a degree
Yeah.
while still being very protective.
Why don't we, for this first episode, kind of talk through the characters?
Yeah.
Because this episode, of course, it roots us with Eric, and I think Eric's fairly likable in this episode
I do
compared
too.
to how much of a whiny so-and-so he can be throughout most of the show. But the pilot really spreads its time across the characters. There were a lot of things that happen in this episode that I was surprised happened in this episode. A lot of Kitty and Red stuff, a lot of Kelso and Jackie stuff. I think the characters all get their chance to, and maybe it's because we know the characters so well, but I feel like immediately you kind of get the vibe of these people, and you kind of know them, and you kind of get how they relate to one another.
Yeah.
So I guess we mentioned Eric a little bit, so let's start with Eric. What did you think of Eric Foreman, first episode?
I like Eric in this episode. I think
Yeah.
that he is introduced as this kind of, standard protagonist. He's got the parents. His place is where all the friends are hanging out. He's got his friends. He's got the girl he's lived next door to. And he kind of centers as the central focus, the thing that the friends are all orbiting around, because all their relationships are going to go through Eric.
And he's kind of fighting against it, too.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the beginning, he is scared of his dad, but he wants to be the guy to go steal beer for his friends in a really fun sequence. I thought this episode, since it's the first episode, there were a lot of filmmaking flourishes that you're never going to get again on the show, because they film it in front of an audience like a play, so you just get straight shots of sets. But there were a lot of like the tracking shot of Kitty in the party in the beginning, or certain shots of the car later in the episode that I thought were really neat. And that sequence of Kitty being introduced in a really fun way,
so fun.
In that party sequence, talking to all of their friends, hot.
And you
This is the
instantly
part
get
I
a
always
sense
remember.
she's the hostess with the mostest. She's running around like crazy, making all these different snacks. And it's cute. It's a great introduction for Kitty. Same thing for Red, who's instantly kind of like a hard ass. He makes a joke about, they set the scene really well with that first scene too. Of okay, it's the 70s gas crisis. Red and Kitty are kind of getting shat on a little bit for having a un-American made car.
Without really now, I'm not from the 70s, so maybe people who are like, give me a break. Oh, brother.
Yeah.
But for me, it works really well, and it's not too heavy-handed for a show that I expected way sillier out of. Yeah, I think Red is good in this episode because you get some of the classic Red one-liners, you get his sternness, but in this episode, he kind of says everything with like a wink and a smile. Which I think is nice. I definitely prefer that Red, the Red who's kind of in on the joke of how tough a guy he is, versus when he is just kind of that tough, which they do
really
both
hard,
sometimes. So that's Kitty and Red. Let's talk about the gang. Donna. We don't get much from Donna as a character this episode, but honestly, I'm worried about how they handle the female characters on this show, so they didn't do anything that made me cringe with them.
Especially bad, yeah.
So that was good. But I think Donna works because immediately you get why Eric would be so in love with her.
Yeah.
You just first glance,
She's one
you
of the
fall in love
bros.
with Laura Prepon. She's one of the bros. She's beautiful. She's tall. And she, like Eric, can kind of not take everything so seriously.
Yeah, she like razzes him, but is also really sweet, makes a lot of jokes that have some truth rooted in them, but also she can play off, and I think that's really funny too, about like, you could have had me when I was 4 and then like kind of like stupid, like mess around. Like it's really endearing, and I think that it really sets
endearing.
Donna up as a smart, witty, really good friend to a lot of the characters.
On the other side, now their relationship is so baby steps in this. Their kiss is adorable.
It's really cute.
And I think it's one of those moments that I absolutely can watch it, and suddenly I'm 11 sitting at my parents' house watching that episode and waiting for my Donna that I can have a cute first kiss on the car with. And now it makes me feel old as shit, because even though the joke with that 70s show is by the end of it, they're supposed to be in high school and they all look like they're about 40.
Yeah.
But in this first episode, they all look so young, with the obvious being Mila Kunis, who's 14 at the start of the show because she lied about her age to get the part. And the other people looking very young, 20s.
Look young, yeah.
We're older than them now.
That's crazy.
It is kind of crazy, and they look like children. Let's move to Jackie and Kelso. I think Kelso is very much like one thing, but Ashton Kutcher, when he commits to it, does that thing so well.
Yeah,
The dopey
it's really
voice.
great.
He gets some of the most obvious written joke, like that's permanent, but he has ways of delivering them where you can see Michael's train of thought, and it's kind of like when we talk about The Good Place, Jason Mendoza, that he can say these stupid, obviously ham-fisted things, and because of his demeanor and his vocal delivery, you're on that ride with him, and it doesn't hurt. It's funny.
So funny.
And his physical comedy, when he flails his body around, and when he's like thinks he's getting in the front seat with Eric and then gets taken to the back seat. The way he just
He,
like
like,
falls
falls
immediately, almost kind of Kramer-esque.
Yeah, it's really funny.
Really
and
funny young
endearing.
performance from Ashton Kutcher. And
Jackie, I think, sets up really well as like the odd one out from the group, but she's attached to them because of Kelso and has this kind of grip on him. And I think I really like Jackie as a character, and so I'm excited to see her kind of almost sink down to the rest of their level of stupidity, and I think it's really funny. So
I
I'm
like her in
excited.
this episode. I think Mila Kunis is just cute as a button,
Yeah,
and is giving a
adorable.
really cute, decisive performance as her character. I don't know. I love watching these and try to put yourself in the perspective of this 14-year-old girl who's one of the stars of a network sitcom for the first time, and all of these kids feel really excited in this first episode.
Yeah, they do.
I think it helps make their characters so likable, and it helps their chemistry form so quickly, because it kind of feels like all of these guys are just bouncing off the walls, ready to perform and to make us laugh. I would like to talk about the circle moment again before we talk about the couple, because that can lead us to Hyde. I thought the stoned discussion, especially Hyde and Kelso in that scene, was so good. And
I'm
TV shows never
absolutely-
get it that right. And they were
No.
so airy and spacey and
And so
laughing at
giggly.
things that weren't funny and making them funny because they're laughing at them. It was really genuine.
It was great. I think that it, as an adult now, compared to when I was a kid, it's super like obvious what's happening, but it's done in such a funny way that it's not like ham-fisted. It's not like, all right, boys, time to get high. Like, they're just there hanging out. That's what they're doing. They bring Fez
Hanging out
into
down
it.
the street, actually.
Yeah. You got me there.
Well, watching this show in such high definition does make you notice a couple of things, like how in the circle there's a clean, empty ashtray on the table. That would never be there. Or I also noticed, separate from that, a couple moments, specifically the moment where Jackie and Kelso are about to make out in the car. They duck down, and then the shot just freeze frames of the car.
It does.
While
it's like
the
not
audio
still
continues.
rolling, it just stops.
When
That
the
was
show
weird.
was aired in 1998, I didn't mention that. This first episode aired August 23rd, 1998.
Wow.
You couldn't see that on your TV. That was just
No.
like a trick that they had at their disposal. But nowadays, you're like, oh, that's just a picture.
Yeah. I literally thought the video was skipping. I was like, is something wrong? And I was like, maybe that's on purpose.
We don't learn much about his character, but talking about the stoniness of the show, you got to bring up Hyde.
Yeah.
Who doesn't get a lot this episode, but I think his character really shines specifically in the circle moment.
Absolutely.
A couple of his line deliveries are kind of awkward in the episode, but his look, we could talk about the fashion. There's Hyde, when they're in the basement, has this like cool patterned shirt and jacket over it.
I
that thought
love
was really
Hyde's
neat.
wardrobe in this show.
Yeah.
It's so cool. Like, I wanted to be, like, to me, that was so cool as a kid. Like, everything
And it
about
still is.
Hyde. Yeah. It just oozes cool.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately. Yeah. Where on the other hand, we have Fez, who oozes not cool. But I love the fucking leisure suit. It's so funny.
I like probably this. Wilmer Valderrama looks as young as any of them. I like this version of Fez that is so young and innocent.
Yeah.
But I really don't like that character, and I don't think they get him off to the best start. Like, literally, his first line is about a girl having tremendous breasts, and I don't know. That's like the only thing in this episode that my fight or flight instinct went in some of the times when Fez did stuff. But maybe that's just shaded by what is coming.
I think
What did you
when
think?
I was a
Of course
kid, I
it is.
loved Fez, but that's because I didn't understand how problematic him as a character was and how culturally shitty a lot of the way
Yeah.
that they address him
Well, because
is.
you're like, I'm a little kid. I also am obsessed with hooking up with girls, potentially.
Yeah,
So
like-
this character that is
and
hell
he's
bent on
funny,
that
and
is
the
funny.
audience always laughs when he talks, so I'm sure that whatever they're saying must be
That's
funny.
true. That's
So,
true.
I think that I really, Fez, he's innocent. He's like a little baby boy. I can't be
He's
mad
not
at
that
Fez
bad in
yet.
this episode.
Fez gets that bad, but not
Yeah.
yet.
He both has moments on my biggest laughs and biggest cringes for the end of the episode.
Yeah.
That's all of the gang. The only other characters I can think of that are worth really mentioning.
parents.
Donna's parents, Bob and Midge.
Love. Big fan
Love.
of both.
Yeah. Totally. Tanya Roberts looked great in this episode.
Gorge.
The moment where it's Eric's POV and he's talking to them and looks down at her breasts is really funny.
The juxtaposition of is it Don Stark, is that who plays?
Yes. Good
Yeah.
job.
Thank you. I always remember his name from the opening credits and being like, that's gotta be
Bob?
Bob. Yeah, that can
That's
only
a Bob
be
if
Bob.
I've ever seen
Yeah.
one.
But the going from his terrible perm down to Midge's boobs is so
Yeah.
funny.
And the setup for that no matter what you do, don't say anything about my dad's hair.
Just don't get caught up in his hair.
We could talk and laugh about all the funny moments in this episode. We're going to start wrapping this up. What I really recommend you guys do is have a circle of your own and watch these episodes before you hang out with us to talk about them every week, because it was fun. It put me in a good mood. It made me laugh out loud more times than I expected both times that I watched it. And I really like the way that they set up this world. The house is so cool. Like, that setting is so blasted into my mind. But this time I was really noticing the little things that they had on the wall and just how lived in the basement looks. And that's really, really neat. And this is the first episode. And they set up the characters and the settings and the Midwesternness of it all and the
So
70s of it
well.
all really, really well. Like,
Yeah.
as far as laugh track sitcoms go, this is a pretty, like I mentioned mathematics, it's like such a by the numbers in the best way possible.
best way, it works.
How
There's a
to
reason
write
why
a
the formula
sitcom
works.
pilot, how to cast a sitcom pilot, how to edit. It just works. Still, what, not 20 years later,
But close.
15 years later, it's still funny and it still works and still rings true whether you were alive in the 90s when it came out or in the 70s
Zach,
when it was
is
set.
20 years later. This show aired in 1998. It's 2023. 25 years later.
Oh, right. I did my math wrong totally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're right. 25 years later.
That's crazy to think.
Yeah, and it holds up.
Holds up.
Now, there are going to be things in future episodes that don't hold up as much. And let's segue that into the first of our final segments where we're going to talk about the biggest cringes we got from this episode. What made us cringy? Ooh. And guys, write us in however you have a way of getting a hold of us. What made you cringe about us this week? Was it Skip McPooper earlier in the episode? I already forget. Do you remember Spud's name?
Spud Speedster.
Speedster.
I said
Did that make you
Speedster a
cringe, or-
couple of times, so it's one of those two.
Was that as fun for you as it was for me? Let's talk about our biggest cringes in this episode. I have a few, so I'll start. They haven't quite figured out the transition visuals yet. A couple of those things made me cringe. The first
You didn't
being,
like the I can't stop this feel. You didn't like that one?
that one didn't bug me, but I
was
did
the
not
Fez
like
one?
the Farrah Fawcett poster that sang.
Baby, baby, baby.
I didn't like that.
You
It
don't
was
love that?
a
I
little
love the Farrah Fawcett
Uncanny
Baby Baby.
Valley. And I didn't like the weird one where Fez was talking about his suit either.
Yeah. Well, you just have no taste, Zach.
What's your cringy cringe?
When Eric was like, well, you know, my sister thinks that we shouldn't be left alone. And then like the second and a half of silence afterwards, that made me really, like, why would you, who would say that? And like, I like Eric a lot in this episode, and he doesn't do any cringy stuff for me really other than that. But that was pretty bad.
Pretty
for
cringy.
me. Yeah.
The other thing I wrote was just Fez's first line.
Yeah.
How do I say this in English? She has tremendous breasts, yes? It's like
that was rough.
immediately you're like, here we go.
Mm-hmm.
Here
Like,
we go.
1998.
Yeah. That's my cringe. We'll move into the positive of that and talk about the things that made us laugh the hardest, our biggest laughs of the episode, whether it's lines or moments. I have several, so I'll throw a couple at you. I really like when Eric is trying to steal the beer and it ends up just working out that he gets handed the 4 beers.
Yeah.
He's like, what are you going to do with Well, put them away, son. I intend to, sir.
I intend to, sir.
These are warm. Could you take this, please?
I
Really
love
funny.
the frantic, like, and Kelso especially later on does this the best, but the frantic running up and down the stairs, like slipping and falling or like jumping over a bunch of like that's so real for when you're like a teenager. You just want to get there as fast as possible, and it's so funny.
And now you're like, nah,
Yeah,
I'll
I'm
get
like,
there when I'm there.
Yeah,
Hyde and Kelso in the circle I thought were specifically funny. They seemed really stoned. I really thought it was funny when Red gives Eric the car and it's a nice moment. He's like, thank you so much. And he's like, yeah, well, clean the attic.
yeah,
The wonder where they're going. Out of town. I wrote that one.
yeah. I really thought that Michael in the circle was really funny with when he was giggling. I also really liked when he was talking to Jackie about why he didn't invite her to the concert. He's like, well, I didn't know if you liked music. I thought that was really good.
And Jackie
too.
just, Michael.
Those were my two biggest ones. I think Red just in general was really funny. The whole like car time when Kitty's like, Lori's friend got pregnant in the car. Don't do that. It is not a bed on wheels. Like that was very relatable, funny. Like Eric's like, wait a minute, am I getting
Red
in the
is
car?
so instantly realized. You just
Yeah.
know that guy immediately.
What the hell is wrong with Bob's hair?
The sequence of the kids doing their parents' voices, I thought was funny.
It
It's
was
stupid,
so
but it made me
stupid
laugh.
and funny. I thought it was hilarious.
Whoa, our kids sure are a crazy group of young people, huh?
I love what you've done with the kitchen. Aqua and yellow, blah, 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 blah.
What's his... Red's talking about Eric, and he's like, that little monkey. I'm going to ground him for 10 years.
10 years. The
Kelso,
acting, like the physical acting by the parents during that whole thing is hilarious.
Ashton Kutcher's acting when Kelso is talking about who's going to have to stay behind at the concert. It's like, well, Jackie, of course. Jackie's out of here. Jackie's gone, but who's going to go with her? And the last thing, the only Fez moment that I thought was funny was when they find out that the mechanic is gay and he goes to the bathroom with his partner and Fez looks at Eric and Eric's like, I'll explain later. I thought that was funny.
Good. Mm-hmm.
So those are our biggest cringe and laughs. That was fun.
Yeah.
That's about the end of the basement this week. We've got one last thing to do. I've had a blast.
I've had an exhilarating time, Zachary. It's been extremely enjoyable.
If I can laugh this hard with you 202 times, this is going to be
That'd be
so
great.
easy. So the last thing we're going to do is kind of our MVP of the episode segment, where we're going to discuss in our circle that we'll have after this in our mind with all the characters from that 70s show, who, based on their performance this episode, gets the first hit.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough because, like I mentioned, sure, Eric is clearly the main character, but the time is spread so well between all of the characters that I can think of standout moments for 3 or 4 characters, and it's hard to pick one over the other. Do you know?
I did settle on one.
Okay.
Obviously, there's a few great choices for great reasons, but I gave my first hit this week to the man, the myth, the legend, Red Foreman.
Sure.
I think that he's so funny and he's in on the joke this whole episode, and I think that it's great. So Red gets my first hit this week.
Then I'm going to go separately from that.
Mhm.
And my first hit this week will go to Michael Kelso.
Nice.
Because
Good
I
choice.
think Ashton Kutcher's performance makes that character so recognizable and so funny immediately. Like, you immediately, oh, that's that guy.
Yeah.
And he makes you laugh. So it's going to be Michael Kelso, but Red is a great choice as well.
That'd be a fun Dream Blunt rotation.
Red,
you, me,
Kelso,
Red,
you,
and
and me.
Kelso. That'd be so funny.
The last thing that I want to talk about is we're going to end each episode with a song. That 70s playlist, music featured in the show. Unfortunately, when this show is on streaming, a lot of the music is taken away from the episode. I think this first episode does have some of the music because it's relevant to the story, but a lot of these episodes, most of the music is gone. So I thought, who better to represent this episode than by playing a song, a little music of Todd Rundgren, since that was the big concert that they all went to in this episode. And they played a song of his in this one that I really like a lot. It's called I Saw the Light. We're going to listen to it.
Let's do it.
So that's the end of the first episode of The Basement. Thanks for hanging out with us. It's been a lot of fun. We're going to be back next time to talk about the second episode of That 70s Show, Eric's birthday.
Ooh, happy birthday.
Should be fun. I'm really looking forward to it. Steven, any parting words for our friends, our family?
Always yield. Always yield.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys. Jam out.
Nice.
That was so much fun.
When you get